Hi, so when it comes to looking forward to a new expansion and providing feedback to Blizzard, there are a lot of elements to an expansion that people will want to have their say about, but none more so than class design. After all of us are likely to choose one character that is our main avatar in the game, and of course we want to enjoy playing it. But sometimes it's easy to look at your class and be a little bit concerned about certain elements of it, and feel that this is going to make you weaker as a result because you don't necessarily know what's happening with a lot of other classes. Now, if it's something that is just affecting your class and spec, then providing feedback can be very valuable because the individual class designers can take that on board. However, some things may be due to an overarching class design philosophy that is going to apply to all of them. Individual class designers will therefore not be able to make exceptions. So what I'm going to go through in this video are the class design philosophies for all classes and specs that Blizzard have stated either on forums, on Twitter, in their live Q&As, or even in individual developer discussions, which a lot of people may not chase down. Now, if there are any questions at the end of this that you particularly have for me, of course, put them in the comments below. I'll try and get back to you. But some discussions need a bit of to and fro, so join me on stream. You can always ask questions at those points. Tuesday is a particularly good night because I do the Azeroth review there, which is a couple of hours of just general WoW discussion. People can come on and ask whatever they want. The final thing to say before I go through these 6 elements is that I'm going to do this objectively. I have personal opinions about all of these things. Some I'm in favour of, some I'm not in favour of, but I tend to keep those for other vloggy videos. This one is just supposed to be giving you the facts so that you can tailor your feedback in a way that is likely to be more useful on the forums or however you choose to provide your feedback to the class design team. So first one is 2-target cleave. This is the most cut and dry. Now, one thing I noticed when I was testing out my Ret Paladin and the BFA Alpha is that it's quite clear there is no 2-target cleave. When I'm presented with 2 targets, I have to DPS down one and then the other. Now, 2-target cleave isn't used a lot. There's the odd boss. You can always think in any expansion of the odd boss where there's 2 of them. Demonic Inquisition from Tomb of Sargeras, absolute classic example, except when you have to split them apart. Now, Blizzard have stated that 2-target cleave is basically only going to be in the remit of 3 specs. Arms Warriors, Frost Mages, Destruction Warlocks. All of those are going to have strong 2-target cleave, and no other spec is going to. Of course, sure, there are certain dot classes which of course will be able to dot both targets, but they will primarily be focusing on one target. They're not suddenly going to do double damage because there are 2 targets or anything close to it. The 2-target cleave is only going to be available for those 3 specs that I've mentioned. So any feedback you're providing as to why your spec, if it's not one of those 3, should have it, is going to fall on deaf ears because that is a overarching design philosophy that has been agreed upon at the highest level. There you go. Second one is increased downtime. Blizzard have been, with all classes and specs, deliberately slowing down the rotation. Now, this will affect some specs more than others in terms of the way it feels. But this is, again, an overarching class design philosophy for the following reasons, whether you agree or disagree. First of all, they say they want people in a raid or dungeon situation to be able to look around them. They feel that people need a little bit of downtime so that they can check out the surroundings, seeing when ads are coming in, seeing, you know, the scenery in general, getting the lie of the land, a little bit more relaxed, allowing them to do more than just focus on their rotation. In Legion, particularly my spec, you would have as little as 5% downtime in the rotation. That has massively increased in the Battle for Azeroth Alpha, and again, that's an overarching design philosophy. And the GCD situation that we've had recently, whereby Blizzard have put offensive cooldowns back on the GCD, is an aspect of that, although that particular aspect of that philosophy is not necessarily set in stone at the moment, so by all means provide feedback on that. But just be aware there is not going to be a lot of fast-paced action in the same way that there has been in Legion, because again, an overall philosophy is just to slow that downtime. And How much is very much up for grabs. How much is sensible? Again, provide feedback on that. But if you're going to try and provide feedback on, well, I don't want it at all, I want it very, very fast-paced all the time, I don't want any downtime, again, that's going to fall on deaf ears there. The third one is about unique class buffs. Now, this has gone through various iterations at the moment on the BFA Alpha. Some classes have them, some don't yet. But the ones who don't yet, it's not because they're not going to. It's just that Blizzard at the moment are thinking about the best way to do it. They want all classes to bring a unique buff that will benefit the whole party or raid. They just haven't decided exactly what they want. This comes from a stated aim of the reverse of a philosophy that used to exist some years ago, where they want to bring the class, not the player. Ian Hazacosta said a couple of Q&As ago, let's say you're doing a pug raid and you've got one spot available. And you look and you've got, say, signed up for that last spot, a warlock, a hunter, a warrior, say. And let's say you've got warlock already, you've got a warrior already, but you don't have a hunter. They want you to bring the hunter. Okay, they don't want you to think about the relative strength of those individual players or anything like that. They actively want you to bring the hunter. So the way they're going to do this is to introduce unique class buffs. So in terms of feedback here, it should be very much along the lines of whether you think your unique class buff would be desirable. Because, of course, if that hunter's unique class buff, for example, is something you can easily live without, then it doesn't work. That philosophy is not working. So by all means, provide feedback on that. The danger with class buffs, of course, is you can open up a bit of an arms race where, you know, everyone will argue that their own class buff is not as strong as some other people's. You know how the usual PvP class design discussions, it does open itself up to that. But of course, and if you provide feedback doing, I just don't feel it's as strong, again, guess what? That's going to fall on deaf ears. However, if you're able to provide any concrete examples, preferably some data or some realistic scenarios in which, and common scenarios particularly in which it's going to fall short, whereas other ones are always going to be strong. That's the sort of feedback I provide, and that's the sort of feedback that is going to do best there. The fourth thing is that Azerite armor is going to be the thing that switches up the playstyles. Now, we've been used over time for tier set items to switch up our playstyle. From tier to tier, the way we play our spec, in terms of the fine details of it, the basics may well remain the same, but the finer details of it can be affected by the tier set bonuses. Of course, we're not getting tier set bonuses, we are getting Azerite armor bonuses, however, and that is what's intended to switch that up. So if you're looking at the way it is on BFA Alpha at the moment and you're feeling just lacks something, it just lacks a bit of, you know, that buzz, you know, that wow factor, it's possible that that is going to come with the Azerite armor. The Azerite armor is not just intended to buff certain abilities, as might be seen on some placeholder stuff. I'm not going to say there's not going to be any of that. There is, but there's also going to be a few things that are going to spice up the rotation, spice up the way you play the game, which can change throughout the expansion as you get different pieces of Azerite armor and potentially even choose different pieces on a fight-to-fight basis. So, you know, the Azerite armor is basically like a pseudo talent system, as well as replacing tier and the Legion legendaries, as well as, of course, the artifact bonus abilities as well. So Azerite armor is very much intended to switch up that playstyle, but at the moment we haven't been able to see a lot of those bonuses, so it's very difficult to provide feedback on that. Now, there are two stated aims that at the moment I don't really see much evidence for, but they have stated these as aims. So the first one is uniqueness of class abilities. They talked a lot in Legion about having unique class abilities. Now, again, I'll use my spec as an example, Retribution Paladins. We lost Hammer of Wrath, boo-hoo. It was seen as an execute, and partially that's what it did, and certainly that's how it existed in the original days in vanilla. And it was saying, well, you know, warriors have execute, so, you know, you shouldn't have execute. And then what they said before we got to see exactly how things were going to be in the BFA Alpha, they said we're going to double down on that. We're going to double down on the class uniqueness. So where an ability is iconic, then they're going to be the only ones who have that. And they gave a couple of examples of this. One example they gave, well, you know, Blink, Mage Blink, so Druid shouldn't have Displacer Beast, so that has been removed. The other one they gave was AoE stuns. So they said, that should be a smaller number of classes have access to those AoE stuns. And that is something they've followed through with. So they've removed AoE stuns from quite a number of classes. And for Windwalker Monks, for example, it's no longer even a talent on the alpha. Ring of Peace and Leg Sweep are baseline abilities because that's their thing. However, there's also been a couple of curious things. So when we come to the Warrior Execute, Retribution Paladins have got access to Hammer of Wrath again. And in fact, there is talk about making it a pure Execute baseline ability as opposed to the talent, the old version that we have now. But nonetheless, that has come back. Now, I'd argue that it was a very different ability anyway, because it's used differently. Even though it's something that appears during Execute phase, it's used very differently. It's a very different ability. So they've obviously slackened their very fixed ideas about what a unique ability is from that point of view. But then they've also given Outlaw Rogues, I did a video on this yesterday, a charge ability called Blade Rush as a talent that nobody asked for. Rogues, as far as I can tell, were not really asking for this ability. It's nothing that's really set in the world alight. But nonetheless, they've introduced what is clearly a charge ability, albeit one that also follows up with a bit of damage. Maybe that's what they think stops it being a carbon copy of the Warrior charge. Who knows? It's on a longer cooldown, of course. That may be the way they look at it. Maybe they look at it as, well, as long as it does something different, so it's not a carbon copy, then the class uniqueness is preserved. So at the moment, for me, the jury's out on whether they're actively pursuing that or whether it was a stated philosophy that they have reined in a little bit. And then the final one is utility being class specific. So in the Q&A just before the BFA Alpha came out, when they were announcing that it was coming out, a question was posed, and it was, do you think that the class fantasy in Legion became too much spec fantasy? And Ian Hazakostas agreed, and he actually very clearly stated that utility abilities really should be class-wide and not spec-specific. He did give the caveat that healer things, healer cooldowns, those defensive cooldowns that healers get, should remain within their remit so that you don't have other people doing what he sees as a healer job. So, no more healing raid for non-resto specs, that sort of thing, which is great. But again, on the evidence of what we see in the BFA Alpha, it doesn't look like they're pursuing that very strongly. Of course, it could be something that is planned, but at the moment, there's no real work on that. For example, Warriors still have Rallying Cry, which is clearly a big defensive cooldown that goes into that, the sort of thing that a healer would normally have. We also haven't had the allocation of spec-specific utility that doesn't come under those that umbrella of healer stuff being spread around other specs as well. So there are utility that is specific to particular specs within a class that hasn't been rolled out across the other specs, even of the same role. So at the moment, there isn't a definite push for that. So that stated aim also is a little bit in doubt as far as I can tell. So those are the stated aims that have come out so far on class design. Bear those in mind, as I say, if you're providing feedback to your particular class or spec. Just bear those ones in mind because those are their overarching philosophies. If anything seems to change, if I can infer anything, or if Blizzard even say anything which seems to suggest a little bit of a shift in any of those philosophies, of course I'll do a follow-up video as well. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it useful. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share with other people who might also be interested. Thanks very much for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.